What's up, guys? How are you? How is your Sunday so far? It is time for another episode of the Bodhiverse. I have one of my favorite authors on today, and forgive me if I fangirl slightly. I have Mr. Mat Auryn on, and those of you guys that have followed me for any length of time, you know that The Psychic Witch is one of the few books that I tell everybody you need to get this book. So I have the author on for you guys today. He so graciously agreed to come on and visit with us and talk about everything. So, hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
So tell me, and everybody else a little bit about you. I have read all, but I think one of your books. The Psychic Witch by far is my favorite. But tell us about you. I want to know about you.
Okay. Ooh, that's always a big question. So I write books, as you were saying. I've been a witchcraft teacher for a really long time, and just transitioned to books around 2020. With the first one, here I have them here for show and tell.
Yay!
First one was Psychic Witch, and then I did a follow-up on that called Mastering Magic, and then I did Pisces Witch with Ivo Dominguez Jr., which was their Zodiac Witch series, and then
that's the one I haven't
latest
read.
is The Psychic Art of Tarot, which is the book I wanted to write even before Psychic Witch. It's essentially like not going over the basics of this card means that, but it's once you know tarot, how do you make it psychic? How do you add mediumship to it? Stuff like that a lot of the books won't tell you. And then we just released a special edition of Psychic Witch. It's hardcover. It's got an extra chapter, extra introduction, extra forward, and a few clarifications from the first book of things that, you know, people were confused by because I didn't write it clearly enough. But I've been a seeker of magic and the esoteric pretty much my whole life. My story starts all the way back at 8 years old, with the sort of traumatic experiences that paired with sort of dabbling in witchcraft as a child, you know. Silver Ravenwolf, Scott Cunningham. There's entry points that, you know, a lot of millennials and Gen X people had. Showed me that magic was real because it got me out of the horrible situation I was in, and that kind of increased my being and research, and just that they have the tools to improve their own life and change their own situations when they need to.
I love that you mentioned some authors that everybody mentions, you know, Cunningham and Ravenwolf and so on. And I also love that you started as a kid. Most people are just coming into it now. So would you say that you are almost all self-taught since you started so young?
No. I mean, like, I think my entry point was definitely. So I was a foster care kid, and my grandfather finally got custody of me, and it was like a really bad situation. It was really abusive. And we were raised Assembly of God, which is two of the most extreme forms of Christianity like come together. It's evangelical and Pentecostal. So I was kind of in this very sheltered bubble. And then one day, by the grace of the gods, I saw the movie The Craft. And I was like, holy crap, it was like a religious experience, which is funny because, like, for our generation, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, did you see The Craft and think you were a witch now? And for me, it's like, yes, I did. So, like, as a little kid, it had a huge impact on me. So I was scouring all information I could find on witchcraft and magic and things like that, because the movie, although it's like, you know, Hollywood, it still is a fairly realistic portrayal, at least for that time, compared to like other movies you would find with the subject. So this is the time that our schools were integrating computer labs. So I would get on to Netscape Navigator and
the good old Netscape,
the Angel Fire website with like midis and like animated tentacles. And, you know exactly.
I see you over there. Yeah.
So I eventually found, you know, that there were authors on this. So I went to my local bookstore and I kept trying to get these Scott Cunningham and Silver Ravenwolf books because we didn't have a whole lot of options back then.
Nope.
and they wouldn't sell it to me because the city I lived in was one of the major like mega church capitals of the U.S. So like even people like they were treating it like it was pornography or something.
Yep.
But eventually, one of them did sell it to me, and I did treat it like pornography. I would hide the books in between my mattresses. It was like my secret.
I love this so much.
Yeah, so I eventually found a spell in Silver Ravenwolf's book, her teen witch book, which was the bullfrog bully spell to make a bully stop bullying you. So I did that on my grandfather to get him to stop like the horrible abuse that he was doing. And you know, a long story short, I've told this story lots of places. It's in my Mastering Magic book. But essentially, like this opened up a series of beyond coincidence, beyond synchronicity, like it's straight up magic that essentially got me out of that situation and put me on the path that I'm on now. So a lot of my training was self-taught up to a point, and then I started getting formal training. I went to Christopher Penzak's Temple of Witchcraft. I did that. I studied with Laurie Cabot and the Cabot tradition, Black Rose, then Sacred Fires, and then I'm always doing non-formal like studies and training through other people, as well as reading every book that I can get my hands on. So it is self-taught, but it's also any formal training that I can get by someone that I feel is legit and can give me skills and knowledge.
There's so much there I want to talk about, but I love that you started off with something that spoke to you, that touched you in a really, really deep way at a time when you really needed it. Because I think that most people, unfortunately, because of social media and so on, most people think that you have to have this glorious experience and this amazing teacher show up, and that's rarely the case. It's usually I'm at a really low point in my life and I see something in a book or a movie or a TV or social media or something, and I go, oh, what is that? What is that? And I love that you move from that to learning from as many people as you can. One of the reasons I love that so much is that's kind of how I grew up as well. I was lucky enough that I had very hippie parents, and growing up in Denver, or right outside of Denver, like in the 80s, like anything you wanted to learn was right there. And so if I wanted to know something, my parents were like, well, let's go find out. They didn't tell me, oh, you just watch too much TV or whatever. So I consider myself beyond lucky in that aspect. But they instilled in me something that I try to instill in students and everybody else, is like, learn from everyone you can. Read as many books as you can. Take as many classes as you can. Just learn, because your practice is not my practice. It's not Matt's practice. It's not Sue Ellen down the street's practice. Like, that's your practice, and what really resonates with you and gives you that boost of personal power is going to be a plethora of different things. So I love that you mentioned that you read all this stuff and then you learned from all these people. So out of curiosity,
yes,
what book has been the one that you read that touched you the most, or that gave you the most like aha moment? The one you would tell everybody, every new witch to read?
Oh my God, that's such a hard question.
I know.
I
know. Somebody asked that to me and I was like, oh no.
Well, I always try to like steer someone, like I try to find out what someone's actually looking for. So I always ask them, well, what about witchcraft interests you? Like what are your current beliefs? And kind of figure out where they're going that way. I can say that probably the most influential on my own work would be The Inner Temple of Witchcraft by Christopher Penzak, which is funny because his teacher was Laurie Cabot, which is why after him I went to go study with Laurie, and gave me the biggest compliment, which was that Psychic Witch is the Inner Temple of Witchcraft, but the Inner Temple of Witchcraft is The Power of the Witch by Laurie Cabot. So it's sort of like different generational takes on the idea of like psychic witchcraft.
So now I want to talk about that, because I don't know when your book came out, but I got it, I want to say like late 2020 or early 2021. Like I got it a long time ago. And when I read it, I was like, God, this is such a fantastic book. And I got it on audiobook because I love the meditation in there that teaches you how to use all your clairs together. And to be honest, that is one of the things that I tell everybody. I'm like, you have to get the paper copy and get the audiobook as well, because there's nothing like going through that meditation. So what was it in you, because you said the tarot book was the one that your soul wanted to write. What was it in you that had you pull out the psychic witch first?
So there's mundane and kind of woo answers to that. So one was
I love woo answers.
I pitched the tarot book to Llewellyn, and they were like, no. Because they had contacted me to write a book, because they were following my blog and saw how big my blog on Pathos was. So they were like, hey, you want to write a book? So I was like, sure. So I pitched the tarot book, and they were like, nah. So I went back, and I was like, well, what's the book that I would want on my path? Like, if I could have a book that gave me like the strongest starting point, but also wasn't purely beginner, something that anyone from any level could get something out of, what would it be? And that's where Psychic Witch came from. And I'm really glad that they turned down my first idea because of how well Psychic Witch did and how many people it reached and how many languages it's in. Like, it's beyond anything that I expected with the book. When I wrote it, I was just like, I hope a couple of people read it, and I hope people don't hate it too much. So, yeah, I mean, and I've kind of taken that approach with all of the books of like, well, what's the book that I would want to read? Like,
right.
What, and I think that's always in the occult kind of genre. Like, I always find that those are the best books, and you can always tell when someone is writing what they want to write and writing more for themselves or their past selves as well as the audience. They can identify the readership with themselves, which is what I do. I always think about like, well, where was I at that stage, and what would be helpful for me.
So I want to know what your thought process was behind writing that kind of guided meditation that's in there about using all your clairs together.
Yeah, so are you talking about the Black Rose meditation?
Yep.
Okay. So so essentially it was kind of like a kind of thing for me, which was essentially guide someone through using all of their senses to see which one is strongest. But then I tied that into entry points into one's inner world. We call it inner planes in occultism. But inner planes navigation. So it's sort of like a soft entry into the internal astral realm. And it's not quite a temple, it's not quite a fixed place, but it's still somewhere that exists. And I chose the Black Rose because that is essentially our public training tradition that we have is Black Rose Witchcraft. So that was kind of my nod to that.
I love that.
And I tried to choose things that I felt that like everyone had a frame of reference for. So like down to like them being chocolate, right? Like,
yes.
I imagine every single person has an idea of what chocolate tastes like. So it's an easy thing to kind of conjure that isn't necessarily going to be unpleasant to most people. Because even things like lemon, like not everyone wants to visualize tasting lemon.
Right. I mean, I would agree with that. I love lemon cake, but I'm not a big, I'm not going to eat a lemon. I'm not going to just eat a lemon. That was one of the things when I first read that book, and I was like, oh, that is brilliant. That is brilliant. I love it. Like, I never thought about what a rose would taste like in that instance, and I was like, that is brilliant. So, I had another question that just completely went out of my brain, but I'm curious. When you studied at these different temples and so on, how long do you spend studying? Do you just wait until your gut, or spirit or whatever is like, and you're done? Or do you take a specific length of time or a class? How do you... I'm asking because a lot of people will ask the same thing. Like, with my personal classes, they're a year and a day, kind of more traditional like that. But I know other people aren't that way. So what's your take on that? What would be your advice to somebody that's like, I don't know what kind of class to take?
Okay. Well, I mean, first research the class and see if you think it's a good fit, and not just because other people are saying, it's the way to go. When it comes to traditions, I mean, these are like multi-year, multi-leveled traditions. And honestly, it's just all about following where my interest is. Like I said, I have this insatiable thirst for occult information, occult knowledge, and for what we call the mysteries with a capital M in witchcraft traditions. And I'm very big on the concept of true will, which is a Crowley concept from Thelema, but I'm very big on it, which is essentially that everyone sort of has their own mission in life. And I feel that the work that I do with teaching witchcraft and writing books is part of that true will. So that'll often sort of kind of navigate me to like, ooh, I'm going to learn this now, or like I feel called to train with these people. And I always get like really interesting synchronicities that do show me that there is something going on behind the scenes throughout my whole life that I'm unaware of, that my higher self is aware of, but I'm not. A perfect example is like those books I was talking about. Like I ended up doing the foreword to Scott Cunningham's sister's book on his life. And then I did the foreword to Silver Ravenwolf's book. And then she had me do the foreword to Solitary Witch, which is that big book, the new edition that just came out. And then I became friends with Rachel True from The Craft. And she did the foreword to my tarot book, and we have a podcast together now. And there's so many countless things like this where there were like these kind of breadcrumbs in my childhood and throughout my path that end up coming in full circle. Like even yesterday, I was at Barnes & Noble's doing a book signing with Stephanie Poulin-Law, who's an artist, and just came out with a new tarot deck, but she's best known for the Shadowscapes tarot. And I was like, holy crap, that's so funny, because when I was a professional reader in Salem and in my personal practice for many years, the Shadowscape deck is the deck that I would use. And I bought that deck like at least 15 times. So to, by no orchestration of my own, to end up sitting next to her at a book signing, like it's just one of those like what are the odds of that? Like with how many tarot decks there are, and how many people they could have scheduled me next to. So I'm very big on following your true will. I think Joseph Campbell has the best kind of watered down everyday kind of version of that, which is follow your bliss, right? So that is going to essentially help guide your true will. So I always try to understand that there is a disciplinary aspect of witchcraft and a part where you have to kind of put on your boots and kind of trudge through things you don't want to be doing. But you should always be getting some sort of enthusiasm out of it. You should have an excitement for it. And enthusiasm is literally, like, if you break the word down, it's being infused with deity, right? Enthusiasm. So I always look for that passion, that bliss, that excitement. So if I have a practice that I feel disconnected from, like, that's a red flag. I'm not going to ditch it immediately, but it is a red flag. Earlier you were talking about, this idea of kind of, because I am at heart a chaos magician, right? So I'm very much about what works. I'm not bound too much to like orthodox thinking.
Yeah.
My mind is always about how do I break things down? How do I reverse engineer it? How can I make this more streamlined for everyone else? And I think this ties to what you were touching on earlier, which is, Aleister Crowley has one of the famous definitions of magic, which is that it's a science and an art.
Yep. Right.
And so the science is essentially the mechanics. You do certain things, the magic is going to work. That is essentially like the recipe of the cake. But then there's the art. And the art is how you connect to it, how you make it your own, how you spiritually resonate with it. So this is like taking the recipe and then tailoring it to like, this is my secret ingredient. I prefer this much more sugar and this less whatever, but it's essentially making it something that speaks to your soul so you can connect to it. I'm rambling now. I don't even know.
I love it. Well, what I love is I'm hoping for the people watching, like, this is confirmation for you, because it's something I tell people all the time. I'm like, you're going to see on social media people like, oh, it has to be this and it has to be this and it has to be that. But it doesn't. But it doesn't. Because if you try to force yourself, it's like whatever that game was. What is that damn game from the 80s that gave us all anxiety? The one that you had to perfection, that you had to put the little pieces in. I hated that game. I think that's where my anxiety stems from. But if you're trying to force yourself into, a puzzle piece that doesn't fit, like, you're going to hate it. Like, you might shove yourself in there, but you're going to hate it. And so I love that you talked about, like, so many different things. And I do have one burning question. What's your favorite Crowley book? What's your favorite book by Crowley? Not to put you on the spot. I'll give you a minute to think about it if you want to. I'm a big fan of Crowley, so.
That's a tough one. I mean, like, I think I'm always returning to the Book of the Law, and I do believe that it is a genuinely channeled book. Because I'm always finding, like, when there's a genuinely spirit communicated book, I always find new layers, the most simple sentences.
Yes.
And every time I read Book of the Law, it's like I read it completely different, new insights, things like that. Magick Without Tears is probably his most accessible book. So Crowley had this problem. Like, he did this with Magick Without Tears, as well as the big blue magic book, Liber Abathor, where Crowley is like, oh, I'm going to simplify it so everyone else can understand it. But he's so out of touch with, like, people that aren't versed in, like, esotericism and magic.
Yep.
That he has a very difficult time conveying it at a beginner level to people. So it's really hard to, like, he's so prolific, just like Carl Jung is so prolific that there's just so many books, and it depends on, like, I haven't read all of either because there's, like, almost countless books.
Yes.
I do find those two figures particularly fascinating, though, because I see a lot of parallels. So Carl Jung and Aleister Crowley never knew each other, never communicated, but they were working with the same base material. They were both extremely interested in alchemy, very interested in Neoplatonism and, the I Ching, things like this. And they kind of went their own ways of studying and exploring it, and they kind of came to their own conclusions, and their own conclusions pretty
match
much
up.
the same,
Yeah.
just with different language wrapped around it, which I find infinitely fascinating.
I love Carl Jung. I love me some Carl Jung. That's one thing that I love speaking about. I'm a big fan of philosophy. Like, I can't get enough philosophy books, and sometimes I drive my own self crazy. I just moved, so I don't have all my books unpacked, and, like, when I come across them, I'm like, oh, I'm, like, so excited, like, oh, this is my friend, it's, here's your place. And then I've come across a couple of books that I forgot I had, and I'm like, oh, I should read that again with all the free time that I apparently have. But I haven't come across my Crowley books yet. I have a whole box that's nothing but Crowley, and I haven't found it, and I'm trying not to panic, but I'll be all right. But it's
one of my most expensive books, I think, is a Crowley. Like, I don't think it's my most. So, like, I'm a book nerd. So, like, our whole upstairs is bookshelves of occult books.
Oh, I love
which
it.
intimidates me, but it's the thing I hoard, right? Like, I hoard occult books and I hoard tarot. And I have a copy of The Garden of Abdullah, I think, which is the one that a lot of, like, the Elamite bros like to pretend doesn't exist, because it's all his, like, mystical gay poetry. And they try to, like...
I shall get to me a copy of that. Like, okay. Noted.
Yeah, I think he's fascinating, and I think he's a great example of, like, not clinging too hard on the person or their teachings. Crowley is a very flawed person, a very, very flawed. Like, I don't think I would like him as an individual, but he was a brilliant occultist.
Right.
And the fact that he's dead, I'm okay supporting him, because he's not benefiting off of it anyhow, while alive. But it's a fine line of, like, discernment of, like, this is maybe not for me, or not a great idea, but not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Not, being like, all of this is crap just because he had a really shitty opinion or problematic statement over here, but not also ignoring it and pretending like he never did, recognizing like, no, that is problematic, like, his treatment of women, his treatment of people of other ethnicities, things like that. Not the best example to look at.
No.
And I think it's kind of ironic too, because he was very big on your own true will, and he was always like, don't get hung up on what I say and how I do it for yourselves. And it's funny because a lot of Elamites do the exact opposite, where it's like a religion of the book, like you were saying, like stereo instructions of doing it this way, only this way.
I'm glad that you said that, because I recognize that I've been doing this a long time, and so sometimes things that are like super obvious to me, I have to back up and be like, all right, this person just started practicing, or like back up, ho, like, people haven't seen that yet, like, but in trying to tell everybody, like preach to everybody, learn everything you can, I do always tell people, I'm like, look at some of Crowley's work, look at some of those different things, pick up the one that resonates with you first. I always like to know, like, if somebody is a fan of Crowley, I'm like, hey, like, what's your favorite book? But I tell people, pick up the one that resonates with you first. Don't ever follow somebody else tooth and nail. There's, I'll remember his name in a minute. It'll come out randomly when I'm not thinking about it. There's a Buddhist monk that I follow. I found him on a TED Talk in 2020 when I was, like, at a really big impasse in my life, because for those of you guys listening, everybody deals with imposter syndrome. I promise. It's not just you. There are times I wake up and I'm like, who the hell am I to say anything about anything? I'm still learning all this stuff. But one of the bases of this TED Talk that I caught of his was to go up the mountain yourself, not to listen to this guy's path or that guy's path or this lady's path or whatever, because their paths, they're all going to see something different. Maybe this person was only studying butterflies and this person was only looking at the view. And if you look at all their paths, then you're never going to find what it is that you're trying to find. And I think the same goes with life, that goes with magic, in that maybe I resonate super hardcore with this practice over here, but you resonate with this practice over here, and maybe somebody came to both of us to learn, and then they resonate here with way down here with this practice. And I think people forget that, because there are so many people that are just, like you said, they get so wrapped up in it has to be this way. I have a lot of friends that practice a lot of the Hellenistic types of magic and the Dianic types of magic, and I'm like, I kind of like dudes in magic too, like I kind of like that too, but I find it very fascinating how different people look at it in a very all or nothing aspect of things. I practice a lot of Solomonic magic in my practice as well. And then I get pushback from people that are like, oh, well, that's in the Bible. I'm like, yes and no, like yes and no, and so I want to ask you about that too. I know it wasn't something that I messaged you about, but because of the way you grew up, how is it you approach people that see? I'm the opposite. I did not grow up in church at all. My dad is native, like, so church on Sunday was going up in the Rockies, like that was church, learning how to walk quietly without disturbing stuff, or making a bow and arrow out of something, or things like that was church. So when we moved back to Oklahoma, and all my friends were like, oh, come to church with me, and I'm like, cool, I want to go to church, I've never been to church. I didn't like church, so like I didn't really go to church very much, but it doesn't mean that I don't respect it, because my grandma also was a big in the mountain magic, the granny magic, and so I was taught to carry a book of Psalms with me everywhere I go, and I do. So I come across a lot of people that are kind of deconstructing from, those beliefs, and since that's something you personally had to do, what advice would you give somebody that is dealing with that right now?
So that's a really good question.
I know, it's a loaded question. It's a big one.
So I think leading up to that, like, I want to touch on what you said before that, because I think it ties into this question. When you were talking about, what this Buddhist teacher was saying, it reminds me a lot of Andrew Chumbly, who was a magister of the cultist Bodhi, which is like a hardcore astral form of witchcraft tradition. And he had a concept that I love, which is that every witch walks the lonely road. And essentially what that means is every witch, regardless of tradition and group or whatever, is a solitary witch. Because the witch walks their path alone means that we encounter the mysteries on our own. These people, these peers, these groups, traditions, people calling us out on witch talk, trying to start beef, whatever. Like, they aren't going to be there when we experience the mysteries that only we can experience.
Right.
And that also includes things like death. Like, we all do die alone. We all are born alone. The biggest things are personal. And so when we transition to the question of like deconstructing your own past religion, I think that's very personal, and it's hard to say for everyone, point by point. But for me, there definitely was a lot of issues that I had to confront before certain levels of magic were unlocked for me.
Gotcha.
One was, despite intellectually believing or understanding things, I had it ingrained in me so hard, this subconscious idea of the devil and fear of the devil and fear of hell. And I think a lot of people raised in those faiths do. Like, as a kid, like in Sunday school, they would have like little plays where like the devil would come and drag someone off to hell. It was constantly pumped in our head. So it wasn't quite until I came to this sort of approaching the idea of like, well, what if I am being tricked by the devil? What if this is all the devil's trick to bring me to hell? And once I was like, well, I'm okay with that, like comparatively of like, what I believe in and what I believe is fair. But for me, my path has been very much, I'm a witch first and foremost. So, a lot of people think I'm pagan, and that's a good label you could put on me. But first and foremost, I'm a witch. And with that means that I interact with spirits and I work with spirits, and that includes gods. And I think it's sort of, while there is merit of like being in a tradition of a religion and working that way, I think it's kind of a narrow view to sort of only work with, like, especially as Americans or Europeans, to deny the influence of Christianity as a culture and these spirits around us. And particularly, like I said, like I had to go through a journey of like reclaiming concepts like the devil and Lucifer, but also Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And like, well, what are these things when I directly engage with them as opposed to what other people say?
Right.
So there's a lot of theories about why there's a lot of theories on even what a spirit or a god is at its core, but I do think that there is power in reclaiming things, or at least addressing things and trying to see where you come to terms with it. So, for example, that Hayley Williams song is really popular right now, True Believer, and the song is essentially about like her faith in like Jesus as she knows Jesus versus the Jesus of like the racist,
Yep.
Republican gun-toting MAGA Jesus, which doesn't reflect the biblical Jesus. And so like I think that there's also this reclaiming of like, well, what is the spirit? Like, what is the spirit actually, and not what people are telling me the spirit is. And I think that traditions can help guide us in understanding what the spirit is. But until we have that personal interaction, we should judge the spirit based on our own interaction with it. And just because you have a good experience or a bad experience with the spirit doesn't mean you have to work with them or you need to work with them. But, first and foremost, like I said, like my witchcraft is based on what works. So like I'm always looking for things that work in things that are open practices.
I love that we kind of moved over into that a little bit. I had a joke with a couple of friends of mine years and years ago. I work with a lot of deities. I do a lot of readings for people that like, I'm like, all right, there are a lot of deities that I don't really care for. You know, like Aries is one. We're not friends. You know, like I'm cool with that. But I had this weird traveling one time. I do a lot of shamanic work and a lot of traveling, and I was sitting in my office at the time, and there's all these deities sitting around me, and this man comes over and sits next to me, and I look over and I'm like, hi, Jesus. You know, and he has on a plaid shirt. My camera just went out of focus. I find that, all right, we won't tell the Jesus story. Like, okay, but he's in a plaid shirt, you know, holding a cup. And so I had a joke with some friends of mine, like, well, I mean, Jesus is a friend of mine and he wears plaid, you know, like it was kind of a joke about it. But, and of course, if you didn't know the story, you'd be like, what? But many moons ago, I started working for different publishing companies when I was 19, 20, in like 96, like I'm that old. And out of all places, I worked for a Christian publishing company, and I worked in editorial, and so I had every version of the Bible in my office. I was the one that got to fact check everything and so on. And after 9/11, when all of the publishing companies crashed, I went to mainly ghostwriting and doing projects and so on. And because of my background, I got hired to do a lot of projects for companies in Milan. We'll just leave it at that. And there were so many that I have this really odd, random talent of being able to take super old English and translate it into modern English. It's like one of the most useless talents, I think, ever. But, I mean, it makes it great for me. But one of these things that I translated, I even asked when I was done, I was like, is this ever going to be released to the public? And their answer was no. We just have it updated constantly and so on. And it hurt, you know, to know that all this information is out there about the time when the biblical era, the scrolls, the books, the writings, the teachings of other people that incorporated Jesus into them when he was learning. Like the time when it skips from him being 10 to, and I'm a martyr, you know, like just that whole length of lifetime. And so I have always been of the opinion that he's more of an ascended master of a, you know, as a deity, etc. And so I love that we kind of moved into that a little bit. One of the things that Witch Talk is famous for is you have to work with Hecate. And I'm like, you don't though. Like you don't though. And not everything that comes your way is her or is, you know, like that's the main one. And I have to tell people all the time, like, this is why you're not getting a response, because it's not her, you know. And so I'm curious, how do you approach that, being someone that you know kind of works with them, speaks to them, etc., when there is one that you don't like, that you don't resonate with? My process, I have way too many Capricorn placements. Let's just start there. I have like 8. So like it's bad, right? My Mars, my Mercury, my Lilith, all Capricorn. So my toxic trait is that if I'm done, I shut all those doors. Like, you didn't exist, your family didn't exist. Like, I become the godfather. Like, I want their whole family dead. You know, like, that's me. So if there's somebody that I don't resonate with, even if I'm helping the person in front of me figure out that it's you talking to you, like, after that, like, I'm out. So how do you deal with that? Because my way might be a little toxic. I'm just gonna say it like
Yeah, well, I mean, no, I mean, I think that just like people, you need to have boundaries, right? And I always find that there's an interesting kind of correlation, well, like, as above, so below, as within, so without, right?
Yeah.
So I often find that people's boundaries with other people in real life often reflects in the spirit world and how they interact with spirits and the boundaries they have with them, you know? So I'm the one deity, and I don't want to name this deity, but the deity that I have an issue with is one that's really popular with people. Like, people love him and they work with him, and he's from a pagan tradition, a polytheistic tradition. But in my experience, every experience I've had, this deity has a problem with consent. And that's a huge problem for me. Like, if I lay down a boundary and I'm like, no, you know, I don't need you pushing to be persistent. One of the things you brought to mind, which is really funny. So, like, when it comes to, like, my relationship with Jesus, have you seen Hedwig and the Angry Inch?
I haven't.
Okay. It's a silly movie, but it's also a powerful movie. It's sort of like if Rocky Horror was funny and modern, but also strongly, like, filled with the philosophy of Plato.
Okay.
But there's this one part where someone asks Hedwig, you know, like, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? And she's like, no, but I'm a fan of his work. And that's often how I feel with it. And it's interesting because you brought up Hecate, and like I have a Hecate background. Deity, but I often look at Hecate in a more of a Neoplatonic view. They viewed Hecate as more cosmic than like earlier eras of Hellenic. So there's a lot of correlations with like the Gnostic Sophia and like Hecate. But there's I think it was Porphyry, a Neoplatonist, who records going to an oracle of Hecate and asking about Jesus, because like Christianity was still fairly new. And Hecate was like, oh, he's great, like, you know, he's a wonderful man, but the problem is people are starting to worship him, and that's not his point. Like, he wasn't there to save anyone. By worshiping him, you're insulting the gods, you know, because he is something different, you know. And so I kind of align with this idea that he is, like, you put on the term ascended master, you know, ascended master, bodhisattva, mighty dead, you know, whatever word you want to put on this glorified example of a human, particularly when it comes to like compassion and empathy. And with that naturally comes his like opposition to like empire and corruption and, you know, being a rebel, which are all like the exact opposite of the Jesus that's being pumped into our faith. You know? But I don't know if I answered your question or I went on a totally different tangent.
I don't know. It was a fantastic answer. I mean, whether it did or not, it was fantastic. I just I think that especially because I'm live so much and I talk to so many people and at events and conventions and, you know, things like that, and I get to talk to people a lot one-on-one, and one of the main questions is obviously like, how do I deconstruct from this, or where do I start? And the other one is like, all right, how do I find a deity? And the first thing I tell people, I'm like, you don't have to have one. Like, you don't have to have one. Like, you need to treat yourself as your own deity first, you know, and hold space for you first, because if you can't hold space for you, then you sure ain't holding space for, you know, a deity or so on. But one of the things that when I tell people, I'm like, you don't have to have one, and you can't just go, that one, I'm going to work with that one. Like, they might help you for a little bit, you know, like, okay, I appreciate it, you know, I appreciate the altar and the things like that, but in my experience with clients and so on, if there's a deity that wants to work with you, like, they're gonna knock at the door until they're banging down the door. And I those of you guys that are listening, you may have heard the Kali story, but I am one of those people that I've had so many come in and out of my life to the point I'm just like, oh, this is what we're doing now. Okay, what do you need? What can I do for you? What kind of flowers you want? Like, I'm a big plant person. I've got you. What you want? But I went through a phase in late 2020 where Kali kept popping up. Well, I'm not Hindu, you know, like, so I had no idea. I thought she was just a deity of destruction, and I'm like, I kind of like my life, you know, like, I'm not destruction. Like, what's going on? And I would go to different shops and have statues fall off after I walked past, and, you know, somebody randomly sent me the Kali deck when it came out, like, things like that. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but no, you know. And I go on vacation, of all places, to Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which is fantastic, by the way. If you've never been there, there's magnetic springs all over the place, and it's wonderful. But we go to eat at this little biker bar hamburger joint. I don't know, the food was great, and the girl's taking our order, and I see on the bottom she has a tarot card, and I see that it's feet standing on someone, and I said, do you have a tattoo of Kali on your arm? And she's like, I do. And she pulled her. I was like, I got it. And so I spent, because it started raining when we got there, so I'm like, I spent that night researching her and was like, oh my God, like, all of these things that have been popping up, that's what it is, you know. So I try to tell people, I'm like, they will make sure you know who they are. Like, don't stress about it. They will make sure. So I'm curious, are you a one deity gentleman, or are you somebody that has multiple that come in and out when you need them?
Yeah. So that was a lot of things at once. So many things I could talk about. So we often divide polytheism in like hard polytheism and soft polytheism, which is like hard is that like they're like people, they're individual, they're unique, they never blend or synchronize. Soft polytheism is sort of the opposite. It's the idea that they all kind of are the same thing on different levels, so archetypally, and then they're part of something bigger. I'm kind of like medium firm polytheist. I think it's something that's still beyond human comprehension, and
Yes.
I think we try to put things in tidy little boxes, and things, especially deity, are not easily put in tidy little boxes. I mean, Hecate's the best example, right? So, like, not only does she have a bajillion epithets and cult titles and names and personas throughout her Greek history, but she's also conflated with other deities. Like, you look at like the Greek magical papyri, and she's conflated with like the Kore and Diana and Selene and Erishkigal and like all these different deities. So I think it's a mystery for sure, and I think that like even approaching deity, sometimes we want to put simple labels on them, like for example like Kali, just like, oh, she's destructive. That's not like, she's a mother too, like but these are really complex energies, and I think Hecate is like that. And I think a lot of people are like, ooh, Hecate, dark, spooky, witchy, like, and I think that's part of her popularity, but also because she comes through and she's badass and I love her. But I think that like two things are true. So I think that deity can come to you and it can be persistent. I've had that a lot. I've known other people that have had that a lot. But I also think that you can essentially be like, I want to work with this deity, and really devote yourself and build that genuine connection with the deity. But it's a lot of it revolves around like how genuine you are, how sincere, and how passionate you are. My rule of thumb is to always treat everyone sort of the same. And I mean that in the sense of like how I interact with spirits and how I interact with gods and how I interact with people are not that different. The outer dressings of it may look different, but there's certain things like, I'm not going to give you an offering because I feel I have to, right? Like I'm giving you, just like I would give a gift to a friend just to show I appreciate them and I love them, or as a thank you for something, but not like a vending machine or because I feel obligated. But it's about like the reciprocal relationship, and I think a big part of that is just spending time with people and getting to know people, and the same is true with spirits and gods, just spending time with them. And I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I am drawn to this deity, but then they don't put the effort and the energy into like building that relationship.
Yes.
And then there are deities that essentially like pick you out and like are like very persistent of like, I want to work with you. And I have various theories on that. Like I do think part of that is also like past life contracts or like in between contracts with these deities. Okay. So, without our conscious knowing that we have a connection with the deity, they come to us to be like, hey, we're like, I'm your girl, But yeah, I mean, like one of my teachers had an expression which was like, if I don't like a god or a god says something that I don't like, the great thing about polytheism is I can go to someone else and get a second opinion, or like, we aren't fixed to any certain religious structure. Just like we shouldn't be forced to be friends with someone or forced into a marriage. Because I do think that like deity relationships do sort of evolve into that. It starts as friends, and it then starts to becoming sort of more of an intimate, very like, I think priesthood is very much, like even if we look at the Catholic Church as an example, like their nuns are all like brides of Christ.
Yeah.
Right? This idea that you've married the spirit and you're devoted to them. I have my main deities, but I will kind of touch out of the boxes of them depending on. One of the great things about Hecate is she has so many aspects and so many epithets that she covers so many bases of area of influence. There was another thing you mentioned I wanted to talk on, and I totally
Yeah, I did a little rambling there too. I think it's hard not to ramble sometimes when you're talking about something that you're really passionate about, that you really really care about. And one thing that I have to remember sometimes is this is my job. Like I am this for a living, and I am this behind the scenes. So people, I kind of forget sometimes that other people are not like that, and then sometimes people don't understand that this is my job. You know, knowing the things, learning the things, talking about the things, painting the things, writing the things, like that. That is my job, to know those things. And so,
well, and they're such big topics. And,
they are.
You know, there's that joke of like ask 10 witches their opinion on something, and you're gonna get like 25 answers.
Yes.
So, you know, and I think that like one of the things I try to stress is like knowing through experience and not believing.
Yes.
Play with belief at the beginning, but you want to know something to be true. And I always constantly repeat the Buddhist saying, I think it's Zen Buddhism that it comes from, which is the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. You know, don't get hung up on these models and these examples of what we're trying to guide you towards. You know, it's very similar to don't confuse the map with the territory.
Yep.
You know, they're two different things. One's a useful sort of thing to navigate these abstract, non-physical things. You know, I often compare occultists to being that metaphor of, you know, either the blind or in a dark room with blindfolded men and the elephant touching different parts of it, trying to describe it, and, you know, arguing with each other of like, no, you know, the snake, no, it's a tree, you know, which is really about like no one has the complete picture, and we're just trying to kind of figure out by comparing our own personal notes of experience and understanding.
I love that you mentioned that. I had a couple of experiences when I was 19 where I got the wonderful opportunity to die twice. So that was great. And one thing that I tell people all the time, because what did you learn? I mean, a lot of shit. But the main thing that I tell people, and this was something that when I had this kind of realization during that, it's made life different for me, and I'm not mad about it at all. But the human brain is not able to comprehend even a quarter of what is actually going on behind the scenes, whether it's past lives, souls, contracts, karma, just the universe in general. And all we can understand is what we can understand from our perception. And I think that the same thing goes for Magick, where everybody's journey to the point that they're at right now when they're listening to this is different. Everything is different. You could be a twin and still be different in what got you where you are. And I think that people forget, and one of the problems that I have with some things and some practices and some people is that they want to say, like, this is the end all be all. I know everything. And so I'll always tell people, if somebody tells you they know everything, run, because that they're not at a place where they can ever grow further if they tell you they know everything. Like, I don't know jack about shit at this point in my life.
In Kabbalah, we would say that there's Pratin Dayan, which is knowledge, which is where people get trapped before they can reach the real mystery. And like what you're describing is in witchcraft what we call the mysteries with the M. These are things that, like, you know, when we talk about mystery traditions, it's not so much that there's these grand secrets that we're hiding from people. It's essentially that, like, these secrets have to be experienced, and they can't be told because language can't convey them. And the example that I always give is like doing mushrooms or acid, right? So before you do mushrooms or acid, we have sort of an idea of what we think that trip is going to be like, you know, and it's often very Alice in Wonderland-y and very, you know, and then we have the experience and we're like, oh no, this is not at all what I thought it would be like.
Yep.
But then you try explaining what the trip is like, and it's very hard. And you can kind of understand where these preconceived notions come from. But if I come to someone who has had a mushroom trip, their mushroom trip is going to be very different than my mushroom trip. But since we've both had that experience, we have enough of an understanding that we can talk about mushroom trip and understand what the other person is saying in a way that someone who hasn't had that mushroom trip can't necessarily understand.
Yep.
And I'm not saying go out and do a bunch of hallucinogenics, like add spirituality at all. But I mean in the sense of like, that's what like the occult mysteries are. They're these experiences. They have to be experienced, and they can't be adequately explained in words and language. Like you said, like we're very limited in like even our vocabulary of trying to explain these experiences. So a lot of it is just a finger pointing to the moon, right? Like we're trying to guide people and trick them into having these experiences for themselves so that they can understand, they can know firsthand. I just remembered the other thing that I was on, which is you were saying that you don't need to work with deities, right? And I think that's absolutely true. In my work, it's not very spirit focused. It's slowly building that way. But the reason is I feel the most important spirit to get in touch with is the one that resides within you and your higher self, particularly because a lot of the older occultists, especially like Thelema, Golden Dawn, things like that, like the whole point of the magic, the high magic, was for knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel, and then from there moving on. And to do that, you need to be in contact with your own spirit and your own self first, and then align with other spirits, kind of get your shit together and work towards that.
I love that you mentioned the Golden Dawn.
I think trying to say that spirits are this or spirits aren't that or God are this or this is the way you have to do it. I'm more about does it work and get it to work? Is it helpful for you? Is it fruitful for you? Because there is a certain point on the other side of the pendulum. You have people being like, don't tell me what to do, but then they're doing really sloppy magic and it's never working because they're ignoring the science part of the science and the art. So I definitely think the balance. And when you're in magic long enough, you see trends of the community, particularly newer people and which way they lean on. And you'll see this even with polytheism, certain debates that come up. But, I think there's a middle ground.
I agree.
And I always have that compass of what works. Can you get results from it? And I'm very results focused. And I think that's a good kind of guide for anything. Even working with spirits, when I trained with Jason Miller, one of the things he was very big on is sure, you could have a genuine spirit contact and they could give you all this information, but is it useful? Is it helpful? Is it accurate? Who cares about some of the information? And I think one of the good rules I picked up from him is are they constantly agreeing with you and flattering you? Because that's always a red flag of either it's not a spirit and it's your own ego and delusion, or it may be a spirit that's not who they claim to be.
Yep. I love that you touched on that. I love it. I love it. I've been teaching for a long time. I've been teaching. I tell people before TikTok was a TikTok, in person, things like that. And I have watched exactly what you say, the ebb and flow of the different trends and so on. And so when a trend comes up that I'm like, oh, I can't with this again. I'm like, it'll go back down. I just have to remind myself, it'll do this, it's okay. And one of the things that I like to point out to people when they're like, well, I don't know, moving from, just, I don't know, magic in general to more of a ritualistic practice or ritualistic magic is, where do I start? So I love that you touched on the Golden Dawn and so on. I will tell people, I'm like, read the Golden Dawn, read that book, read those, read the Key of Solomon. It's a very dry read, and some of it you're falling asleep halfway through, but that's where a lot of the basis of what people practice in just general magic, casting a circle and things like that come from. And I I think one of the key notes that you've touched on, and I think I've touched on a little bit as well, is that everything is so interconnected that people don't realize how interconnected everything actually is, whether you believe this practice or that practice or not. And I also love that you touched a lot on different Buddhism and things like that. I am that person that I tell people I will give you different philosophy books. I'm like, yes, read this magic book and read this magic book and this. However, also, read The Art of War. Like, that is one of my favorite books. And when I tell people, when people are like, oh, well, it applies to life too. It applies to magic too. Like the things you learn in The Art of War and was it the Five Rings? Like the things you learn in those type of things are going to help you be a stronger person in here. So when you're ready to level up your magic, when you're ready to take on more, you're already good in here. You can handle it and so on. And so I love that you touched on some of those things as well, instead of just, I don't know, just magic, like let's just talk about this. And there is a science behind it. So because we touched a little bit on like intuitive and doing what spirit is leading you to do and things like that, I just want to ask your opinion on something when it comes to social media, when it comes to this spell is this and this spell is this. One of the questions that drives me up the wall, and I don't know if it does you as well, I'll say you need to use cinnamon for this, and people are like, well, can I use salt? I'm like, what? Like, hang on, what? Like, I'll tell people, like, because I get it, you're allergic to cinnamon, please don't use cinnamon, like, here are other ones. But one of the things that cracks me up the most is when you're giving somebody, like, here's the instruction, here's how you do this, or whatever, and they pull an ingredient way over here, and they're like, well, it's the intent that matters. My response usually is, not all of it, So what would your response be to something like that? Because I know it's a big topic on a lot of people.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm on board with you. So like that goes back to like the science aspect of it, right? Like cinnamon and salt have totally different properties. They work as spirit in different ways, so they're gonna partner with your spell in different ways. I mean, I go back to the idea of cooking, right? So you can substitute items if it's an appropriate item. The result is not going to be the same. So if you replace sugar with Splenda, you'll have a similar result, but it's not going to be the same result.
Right.
If you replace sugar with mustard,
I was waiting to see what you were going to pull.
Similar. Like, you're not going to get, the same result at all. If you don't bake it at the right temperature for the right amount of time, it's going to be inedible.
Yeah.
Either not cooked enough. And I address this in Mastering Magic. I differentiate the idea between intent and will. So intent is important. Intent is, the plan for something. I intend to get up and walk across the street. You can intend all day and night and never walk across the street. Also, you can have good intentions and do something harmful. And I'm not talking about magic. I'm talking about mundanely. It can be like, I didn't intend to hurt your feelings. It doesn't matter what you intended. You hurt the person's feelings. So intention isn't everything. But it is helpful because it helps us to essentially aim where we want our target to go. But I think will is more important, and that's why the old occultists put more of an emphasis on will, this idea of like, I'm going to do it, and in Mastering Magic, my second book, I have exercises on how can you identify what that force of will looks like in your body, so you can tune into it for your magic. I am much more of, if I do not have cinnamon, say I don't have cinnamon at all and it calls for cinnamon and I don't have an appropriate replacement for it, I am much more of a fan of calling upon the spirit of cinnamon for the spell that I'm doing than trying to find something that's completely off place, like salt or, like bay leaves or something that just isn't in resonance with what my intention is, Because I'm very big on this idea of like not treating things like ingredients, not treating it in a, I think we have a very like colonial capitalist mindset of like things are ingredients, we use things for our own, whatever. But like for me, my magic is a lot more animate. It's a lot more about partnering with the spirit of these herbs and building a relationship with them. One of the things that sometimes gets a lot of like drama every now and then once people discover it is Scott Cunningham has this thing about, rosemary's a substitute for everything. And a lot of people are like, what? No, it's not. But one of the things I learned about doing the forward to his biography from his sister was that rosemary was his closest plant spirit ally.
Gotcha.
So for him, he could get it to work for these other things because, they were powerful. So it's sort of like, it wasn't its day job, but since they were friends, it will go into a favor that's outside of its normal job. And that's why I think, like, relationship. I think a lot of magic is the art of relationship, of how we relate to the world around us, to the spirits, through reality and the mysteries. And I always try to bring the focus back on that it's about, it's like you said, like the interconnectedness, right? Like, like I do believe in individualism to a degree, but I think that, to put it into lemmic words, like the Aeon of Horus is coming to an end, and now we're coming to what I think is like the Aeon of Wheat. This idea that we're all connected, we're all community. We need community again. We need this sort of understanding of where we fit in the bigger picture and not too much focus on just me, because we're seeing what that mentality is doing to our world, both environmentally as well as social and politically.
I love all of that.
That's my
I'm a big plant person. Like as soon as we're done here, I'm going to play plants. Like I got in all these new watering things and so on, and I've got to prune and make, separate pups and all that stuff. So I love that. I haven't read your foreword, so I need to go and read that because that gives me a whole new outlook on rose. Like I love me some rosemary, but there's a couple plants that I resonate with, and anybody that follows me knows that blue lotus is one of them. I've used blue lotus for 15 years now, and it's my soul plant. Like I can get blue lotus to do almost whatever I need it to do, but other people are like, well, I don't like it, I can't really use it. That's cool. I think that a lot of people don't realize they need to find their soul plant. Another plant that I resonate with that I have way too many of are pepper plants. I don't like peppers. I don't like spicy things at all, but I have 16 different varieties of peppers in there. Like, it's...
That's funny.
I have them, but they like me, I just can't eat them, and that's cool. But I was speaking to another friend of mine who's a practitioner who's big into plants and so on too, and we were talking about plants in your home and herbs as warding, as protection, as, kind of that first line of defense. And that's one thing that I always tell people, because they're like, oh, I'm not a plant person. I was like, I will make you a plant person. Like, ivy will grow in a bowl of water. Like, you don't have to worry about watering it. Just keep water in the jar. Like, I grew up in a very Celtic family, very Irish family. We always had several ivy plants. They were always by the doors, by any point of entry, basically, like that. So ivy is another plant that I resonate with. So that kind of leads me to like a fun question, like, what's your favorite plant? What's your favorite herb? What's Matt's favorite herb?
So, I have a close relationship, like you're saying, with a couple of plant spirits. So mandrake is one of the plants that I can get to grow. Like, I don't have a green thumb, and mandrake is like notoriously hard to grow, but I have a good connection with it, and I'm just like, oh, that's so witchy, right? The other plant spirit ally that I have a really strong bond with is the artemisias. So like wormwood and mugwort are very, very strong allies for me, and they're very related, but they're very different too in personality. I have a big connection with lemon balm too. Lemon balm is one of my buddies. and lavender. And I know lavender is always seems such like a basic rich kind of, you know, but no, I love me some lavender. And you can even curse with lavender. Like
Oh, I
it's such
love
a
that you said that.
versatile, like,
I love that you said that. When I point out to people that everything has a good and a bad meaning, I'm like, do you realize that every crystal you own has a good meaning and a baneful meaning? And every plant and every herb has a good meaning and a baneful meaning. I can see some of them are like it just opens up everything to them. And so I so love that you say that. Like, I was designing a spell for someone the other day, and I was talking to my best friend on the phone, and you know, and it was basically a working for this person to do that helped them get over a very abusive relationship and the heartbreak that goes along with that. Even though you know it's a bad relationship, you know it's a toxic relationship, and you don't need to be there, you still have those feels. And so I'm naming this stuff off like to help with this, and she was like, what are you going to do with those? What are you going to have her do with those? Those are like love things. And I'm like, burn them. And she was like, oh. I was like, yeah, we're going that route.
I always think of like Venus, right, as like a planetary power, because everyone always thinks it's like, you know, the thing that it's normally associated with, like love and attraction and, you know, beauty and things like that. But Venus also has a dark side, you know, like venom comes from the word Venus, you know. It's this idea that like any plant is medicine and poison in the right dosage and by using the right part. And I think that ties into like the Hermetic idea of like the Hermetic principles of like everything is its opposite, but to a different degree. So it's about like what you're calling upon on that thing, right? Like water can become a poison. Like we need it to live, and it's one of the most healing things we have. You drink too much of it, you're gonna overdose on it. Like you have too much of it, you're gonna drown.
I pointed that out to. I love that you mentioned that. I pointed that out to someone. I want to say it was a week or so ago. We were talking about, you know, all things in moderation. I love bacon, and you know, I'm happy to have death by bacon. Like I'm okay with that in my life, you know. But we were talking about things like that, and in a joking manner. And I don't know. She said something about toxic herbs or whatever, because I love me some toxic herbs, you know. And I said, well, you know, technically anything can kill you if you have it in the wrong form. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you realize like if you go in there and drink too much water, you'll die. And she said, that's not a thing. And I was like, no, I pulled out, you know, like Google it. And she did. She was like, oh my God. And I said, yeah, anything can kill you. So when somebody always tells me, oh, you know, don't do that, that'll kill you, I'm like, bitch, I'm diabetic, Skittles will kill me. You know, like, so I mean, wormwood is the least of my problems, you know? Like,
that brings up another really good point, too. Like, so not only are people going to have different things that they're drawn to and different preferences, right? Like, so if we go back to the baking metaphor, like, we're going to have certain tastes that we like. But then certain people are also going to have allergies to certain things. Some people are not going to just not jive with a certain aspect of their practice or a certain spirit, whether that's a deity or a plant spirit or whatever, you know. And that's why the cookie cutter approach, like, of orthodoxy, just like, I just think it's kind of bullshit, you know. I think it's confusing the finger pointing at the moon for the moon, you know. Like, these guidelines, these maps, these reality models are important because they're helpful. But like once we start getting fixated on them, or we start saying like, I know the way or the truth, like even in reconstruction of like polytheism and stuff like that, or archaeology or science, you know, we think we have it figured out, and then we learn something new, and then our whole understanding of a topic can be totally changed. And so I think that kind of openness to the best, like, so Tito and Coyle, who's a friend of mine and a great teacher, they have a saying that I really love, which is like, beware the teacher that doesn't have teachers, you know. And I always think that like the seeker is the teacher, is they're on the right path. Once you decide, I'm done learning, I'm done studying, you know, I've got it figured out, that's when you stop growing, and that's when you start atrophying. Because going back to like not even just science, but the Hermetic principles of like, if you're not growing, you're going to start doing the opposite, which is decaying, you know, and you're going to start losing touch with your magic. And I think that often that will happen to people, and they will start to get insecure, and they'll lean more into that orthodoxy of trying to like police other people's practice because they feel insecure about their own. You know, so everything in balance, right? Whether it's plants and like poison medicine, beneficial magic, malefic magic, you know, science versus the art of it. You know, I think everything in moderation, and about figuring out like what's good for you and what works for you.
I have had like, this is the best. I'm having like way too much fun talking about all of this. I already like loved you as an author, and like actually getting to talk to you, and just instead of staying on topic. This is why I told you, like in the thing, I kind of like to just talk organically, because you never know where it's going to lead you. Never did I think we were going to be talking about deities and herbs and so on. So I am not sorry. I don't want to keep you too much longer, because I feel like we could probably sit and talk for a very, very long time. I adore your brain, and I love that you know so much shit about so much shit. Because that's one of the things that I think sometimes it's hard to find, especially when you've been in the spiritual realm for a very long time. Like when you're mentioning, you're throwing out things, you're like the Golden Dawn and Thelema and the Greek papyri, and I'm like, I see you over there, Matt. Like I see you over there. So I'm going to go ahead and let Matt go for the day. We actually went over our hour. That's why I was like, oh no, I don't want to keep Matt too much longer.
I'm sorry. I nerd out on this shit. So like,
dude, if you ever want to come back on and we can do a special nerd out session, I'm down. I am totally down. I would love to talk Thelema. I would love to talk the Golden Dawn. I would love to talk Hermetic practice. You know, like some of the older ancient, you know, magical things like that. Like those are my favorites. Those are my favorites. That's where I'm down to nerd out, like especially about the ethers with Crowley and things like that. Like I am down to nerd about those things. But I would love to have you back on whenever you are available. For those of you guys that don't follow Matt, I did put all of his socials down below. Please go follow him everywhere. And if you don't have a copy of The Psychic Witch, you're wrong for that. I'm just gonna say you're wrong for that. It's one of my favorite books. It's one of the ones that I tell you guys all the time. I am not a Pisces, but I'm totally gonna read. I'm gonna have to read that one. But
Pisces Witch was fun to write.
So is there a Capricorn Witch? Because I need to read
There
that
is. There's one for the whole series, and the anchor author is like one of my teachers and one of my idols, which is Eva Dominguez Jr. Like I always joke he's who I want to be when I grow up. Like,
I always thought there was somebody else I wanted to be when I grew up, and I realized like I kind of dig myself, man. You know, like yeah.
And that's why I say half joking, right? So whatever the Mat Auryn version of that looks like.
I mean, I think you're cool as shit. So there's that. But if you guys don't have a copy of Matt's book, you get no silver star, no gold star for today. Like, I'm not going to take a gold star away, but I'm just saying it is one of my favorite books. And especially for those of you guys that are trying to learn how to incorporate your clairs, his book, The Psychic Witch, is the best one I have ever read on that topic. So we're just going to throw that out there, throw the gauntlet down. So, all right. I will let you guys go. We'll let y'all head off on your magical little journey for today. And I'm just going to leave you with my favorite quote, because I feel like some of y'all need to hear it. And it kind of goes with what we were talking about. And it's, you're not this or not that, y'all. Okay? All right. We'll see you guys later. Thank you so much.